Chapter 96. The Rotten Indian Jail. Mr. Alexander and his wife tried to convince the church leadership not so soon to forsake Inez. They requested them to meet with her in jail and hear her story. They should know whether those accusations were true or not. Unfortunately, the leadership said their decision was final. In private family meeting, the Alexanders decided to shoulder alone the responsibility of appointing a lawyer for Inez. They felt guilty because they believed that they were the ones who put her in that unpleasant and difficult situation. If truly Inez had committed adultery and participated in drugs activity, then they had to be blamed as well. Accordingly, Mr. Alexander approached a good lawyer and paid him in advance and requested him to meet with his client Inez Ahmed Salah. When her new advocate met with her, Inez admitted everything written against her in the charge sheet except the drugs and sex charges. She pleaded the fifth. She informed her new lawyer that, since the day she returned from Doha City to Bombay City, she didn't go out of her apartment except twice. The first time, when she traveled with her husband and their baby from Bombay to New Delhi and both went to the UN office. The second time, on the same day she was supposed to fly with her family to Canada, but she got arrested at the airport. On the morning of the same day, she traveled with her husband to Bombay downtown and visited many places. As a consequence of that, she emphatically believed, the Muslim girl in the black burqa who met the Afghani old man at the Bandra Fair steps, and took the handbag from him and passed it to the African student at the Bandra local train station wasn't her. The lawyer told her still there were enough evidence to convict her with the drugs charge. First of all, she admitted on tape that she met the two Indian drugs traffickers and agreed to have sex with the husband and also promised to help them with their drugs business if they helped her to return to her family in India. Inez was dumbstruck when her lawyer confronted her with her own recorded confessions. She knew there were no Indian drugs dealers by the names of Vijay Alexander and Teresa Alexander. But, she also knew, she would not tell who were the real Vijay and Teresa. Moreover, she knew who deceived her and blackmailed her in sex. But she expected no one would believe her words if she said the head of the CID had raped her and the Hindu policewoman shot the video. How the police authority were going to identify a man who was wearing black mask. Inez was suffering day and night. She was thinking time and again about her bleak future in the Indian jails. How was she going to spend 19 long years without hope or encouragement, depressing, dreary, and without love? Thinking too much about her dark future made her to be suicidal. If her untimely death wouldn't hurt those who loved her, she would have already killed herself from the day her charge sheet was read in the Bombay Criminal Court. Besides her mental tortures and heart troubles, Inez also was facing many problems inside the Indian filthy jail. To understand the problems Inez was facing inside the Indian rotten jail, close your eyes and imagine you are in the filthiest public restroom you had ever visited. Take a deep breath while conjuring up a stench that lingers in places where only roaches and vermin dare to trod. Combine those odors with the scent of dirty sweat socks, t-shirts and underwear, urine, and vomit. Picture yourself living or working where every breath is similar to what I had described above. Never a single lungful of fresh air. Could you drink water from a sink that was used to wash the feet of a woman who just finished working on a roadside work gang for 8 hours in 90-degree heat, a sink positioned 2 feet above a toilet that was used several times a day by 10 to 15 women, but was only capable of being flushed twice in 8 hours? How about sleeping in a 6x9 room with 10 other women who hadn't bathed in several days during the hottest time of the year? There was no ventilation. No windows to open. How about sleeping on the floor with nothing between you and the grimy concrete surface, but an itchy, wool blanket? Cockroaches, lizards, rats, and mice darting from gaps between rusted plumbing and cracked cinder blocks. Flies in thousands during the day and mosquitoes in millions at night. Dried blood and vomit were the only splashes of color on drab walls. In short, the miserable and inhuman conditions in the rotten Indian jails were worse than those in the southern Sudanese hotel that Inez lived in with her husband and other 17 asylum seekers. She was now staying in a small dark room with other 14 inmates. After her first hearing, she was moved from the Tana Women's Prison to the Bikola Women's Jail. All her new inmates were foreigners, 4 were white girls of whom 1 an American and the other 3 Europeans, 3 Nigerian girls, 2 Pakistani girls, 1 Kenyan girl, 1 Afghani girl, 1 Somali girl, 1 Iranian girl, 1 Lebanese girl, and she was the only one from the Kingdom of Tartarus. All the 15 girls were arrested under the charges of drug smuggling activities from India to Arab and Western countries. All the 14 girls were caught red-handed and admitted their charges except Inez. In those inhuman conditions the poor Inez lived for 1 year before the final hearing of her trial came. Usually, the Indian suspects would remain in remand for at least 3 years before their cases were finalized. Nevertheless, the foreign suspects due to outside pressures were tried in short period. Inez's troubles increased after 2 months. She missed her period twice before she came to know that she was pregnant. She knew that she hadn't been impregnated by her husband. After delivering her first baby, the lovers decided not to have another baby until they would move to another country and both were gainfully employed. Conclusion: Inez had been impregnated by her rapist Ralph Wolf. Until that moment, she didn't tell anybody about her rape. She had expected no one was going to believe her words. She had already condemned herself by her own admissions, which was played in court as evidence against her. She said she had agreed to have sex with the notorious drugs trafficker Vijay Alexander. But now, Inez had strong evidence to prove her rapist was the one who deceived her and forced her to make false confessions. To identify a child's biological father, the Indian court allows the mother to file for a DNA paternity test. For that reason, Inez decided to remain silent until her baby was born. The other foreign inmates cautioned her to be extremely careful and not draw the ire of the prison guards and officials. Many women had been beaten mindlessly, including pregnant ones. She wouldn't be given nutritious food and she would be lucky if they took her to hospital before her water broke. They would wait till the last minute. Many pregnant inmates had given birth on the way to hospital, in the police wagon. Joseph discovered his wife was pregnant after 3 months. Even though, he avoided talking to her about it because he thought his wife's pregnancy was the result of the sexual intercourse she was compelled to engage herself in it in order to buy her freedom. He knew after their daughter was born, they used condoms whenever they slept together. All the Alexanders thought that Inez was impregnated by her husband before she landed in jail. For 1 year, the good man Mr. Alexander supplied Inez with all her daily needs such as food coupons, clothes, soaps, toothbrushes, toothpastes, etc. He also continued to pay her lawyer's fees. He and his wife and sister visited her often in jail and never missed a single hearing. Her husband also was always besides her. Every time he came to visit her, he brought with him their baby girl. By then, Grace had grown into a lovely child. She had a beautiful complexion of a mixture of her extremely handsome father and very beautiful mother. Chapter 97. The DNA Test. It was only after her baby was born did Inez open her mouth and informed her husband, the Alexander family, and her lawyer about her rape and whom she believed was the biological father of her newborn baby boy. The Alexander family believed Inez's claim and showed great interest and encouraged her to apply for a DNA test to determine her baby's paternity. Nonetheless, the lawyer warned his client about making such serious accusation. He told Inez that, if the DNA test failed to positively establish her claim, she would face more serious charges. She would be charged of character assassination and deliberate and sustained process that meant to destroy the credibility and reputation of the highest police authority in the Bombay Police Enforcement. This type of serious accusation, if could not prove through the DNA test, it might double her sentence and hence she might get up to 30 years prison sentence without parole. Inez said she was 100% certain that she didn't have sex except with her husband and her rapist, Mr. Aslam Noor al-Haq. She further said that, after the delivery of her baby daughter, her husband always used condom whenever he made love with her. The lawyer accepted her words, but he came up with a brilliant idea. He said sometimes condoms might fail to prevent pregnancy. According to him, before taking any legal action against Mr. Aslam Noor al-Haq, Inaz should convince her husband to undertake DNA test to decide whether the baby boy was his child or not. Mr. Alexander liked the brilliant suggestion. He proposed to cover the expenses of the DNA paternity test. Joseph was on the moon when he heard that his wife didn't indulge herself in a beneficial sex with the notorious Indian drugs lord. For 9 months, he was under the impression that his beloved Inaz had compromised with her honor because she wanted to escape her inevitable death. So, he too showed great zeal for taking the DNA test. Such test was going to clear his beloved from the malicious accusation of adultery and also avenge her on the evil man who abused his authority and raped a defenseless female detainee. This was going to be the greatest crime ever committed in a secular country like India. Rape of this kind never happened before in Hindustan. Many Indian girls got raped inside the interrogation rooms, but their rapists were ordinary policemen. But, Inaz got raped by the head of the Criminal Investigation Department and her rape was stored in a tape. When Inaz exposed her rapist, Mr. Aslam Noor al-Haq had been promoted to the highest position in the Bombay Police Enforcement. He became the police commissioner of the entire city of Bombay. He advanced in rank, dignity, position, and became filthy rich. He was living in a huge mansion in the most expensive area of the cosmopolitan city. Only Bollywood celebrities, film stars, and business tycoons could afford to reside in Malabar Hill locality. He also had another house in Juhu. Juhu also was among the most affluent areas of the city and home to many Bollywood celebrities. In addition, he had many farmhouses and resorts. He owned many cars. Without exaggeration, he had more security guards and bodyguards than the Prime Minister of India. By now, he had long time ago forgotten about his victim, the apostate Sudanese girl. He believed he had fixed her with crimes even God could not save her from the life sentence. Notwithstanding, Ralph Wolf knew he had yet one last nail to place in the coffin of that apostate Sudanese girl. For him it wasn't enough to fix her with a 19 years prison term. He wanted to kill her and overkill her. Therefore, he determined to take his final revenge on the ex-Muslim Sudanese girl who gave the sworn enemies of Muslims, the accursed Hindu idolaters, chance to ridicule Islam and make mockery of the master of creation, the Prophet Muhammad. He decided to wait until she was tried, convicted, and received the maximum sentence. Then he would contact the Sudanese embassy in New Delhi and ask them to apply for transfer of their imprisoned citizen Inaz Ahmed Salah from Bombay Central Jail to a prison in Khartoum. He knew and understood what was the punishment of the apostate from Islam in a Muslim country governed by the Sharia of Allah and His Messenger Muhammad. Inaz's lawyer, under the request of his client, applied for a DNA paternity test. In the request form, he mentioned that his client, Inaz Ahmed Salah, wanted to know whether her husband had fathered her newborn baby boy, or the man with whom she had sex in the recorded tape, the biological father of her baby. The lawyer stated further that the reason for such a DNA test resulted from a family dispute between Inaz and her husband Joseph. The court had already had in the rap sheet a charge of adultery between Inaz and her accessory in crime, Mr. Vijay Alexander. In accordance, they allowed Inaz's new baby to undergo the DNA paternity test. Consequently, Joseph and the new baby underwent a parental DNA test. The result came out 100% negative. The result was solid proof that Inaz's baby had a different biological father. Being emboldened by the DNA paternity result, the lawyer agreed to file an official complaint against the former head of the CID, who was the current police commissioner of Bombay City. Nevertheless, Mr. Alexander knew such powerful man as Mr. Aslam Noor al-Haq, who had the entire Bombay police authority in his hands, and most probably had many underworld Muslim gangs and dangerous terrorists under his service, would do anything and everything he could to silence and destroy a powerless and helpless detainee as the foreign girl Inaz. He might arrange the kidnap of the baby and the murder of his mother as soon as the news of the accusation would reach his ears. Such a man for sure would be having many eyes and spies everywhere in the city. Accordingly, Mr. Alexander suggested that Anaz's lawyer should submit the complaint to the Indian Ministry of Home Affairs in New Delhi. As soon as the complaint reached New Delhi, the Minister of Home Affairs ordered the immediate transfer of Anaz and her baby to a women's jail in the capital city. The purpose of the transfer was to ensure the safety of the mother and her baby. Only after Anaz and her baby boy arrived in New Delhi did the Minister of Home Affairs order the DNA paternity test to be administered on the Police Commissioner of Bombay City. Moreover, the order for a parental DNA test became public knowledge and the media published it in Bombay as well as New Delhi. It was the greatest breaking news ever hit the nation of India. It surpassed all the sex scandals of Bollywood film stars, great politicians and top officials in the police enforcement, combined together. Young Indian women demonstrated on the streets demanding the death penalty if the accusation turned out to be true. Hindu journalists and other media people wrote extensively about it. Muslims went on the streets and shouted their protests. They considered it a conspiracy concocted by their enemies with the intention of destroying a faithful Muslim public servant. Ralph Wolfe at first refused to undertake the DNA paternity test. He said in an interview, most probably some Hindu doctors somehow stole his seminal fluid and used it to fertilize the female ova of the Sudanese woman who is in remand. Nonetheless, the Minister of Home Affairs passed order to conduct the DNA paternity test on the Bombay Police Commissioner against his will. The order was carried out by the new head of the Bombay CID. Ralph Wolfe's residence in Malabar Hill was raided by 30 military soldiers and 40 police officers. The soldiers were armed to the teeth and the cops were also carrying sophisticated machine guns. The DNA paternity test was conducted on the same day at the Indian Biosciences, DNA Testing Labs, Zion Circle, Bombay. Then Anaz's baby boy's cheek swabs was sent securely in tamper-proof packaging from the DNA clinic, Rajanagaram, to the Indian Biosciences, DNA Testing Labs. The cheek swabs of the baby and Ralph Wolfe were run 2 separate times in the lab and the results were triple-checked by expert scientists. Finally, the DNA paternity test compared the child's DNA pattern with that of the assumed father to determine if there is a match. When performed in the experienced, accredited laboratory, the result came as the most definitive proof of a biological relationship of 100% accuracy. The final result was that Mr. Aslam Noor Al-Haq was 100% the biological father of the newly born baby boy of the detainee Anaz Ahmed Salah. Conclusion: the latter was raped by the former. Immediately, the culprit Ralph Wolfe was stripped of his position and thrown behind bars awaiting the Bombay High Court final verdict. Chapter 98. The final hearing. Anaz and her baby remained 3 months in New Delhi under protective custody. Her case was discussed and hotly debated in all the media avenues. Many women's organizations demanded her immediate release. Some of them wanted the government of India to compensate the rape victim Anaz. The Indian women's rights activists called for the death sentence to the Bombay Police Commissioner who took advantages of a defenseless suspect and abused his authority and raped her inside the interrogation room. In spite of the countrywide protests, the Narcotics Police of Bombay refused to drop the drugs charge from Anaz and release her. The Narcotics Police said there was ample evidence that the suspect Anaz had engaged in drug smuggling activity prior to her arrest and rape inside the jail. She had confessed her involvement in the drugs charge. In her confessions, the suspect mentioned that she met 2 well-known drugs traffickers in Qatar and promised to work for them if they helped her to escape from the hotel in which she got trapped for many days. The Narcotics Police had recording of her full confessions. Moreover, the police had her photos taken by an informant. The photos showed her when she received the drugs package from an Afghani man at Bandra Fair Steps and when she delivered the same package to a Nigerian student at Bandra local train station. Therefore, the Bombay Narcotics Police refused to acquit Anaz without being punished for her other crimes. Upon their return to Bombay, Inaz asked her husband to give a name to her baby boy and adopt him as his own son. All this time, the baby remained a nameless infant. Joseph chose to name his adopted son Victor. He believed his wife had been vindicated of the sex scandal and therefore for her and him that was victorious triumphant. Shortly after her return, Inaz was taken to the Bombay Criminal Court for her final hearing. Her lawyer had already predicted her sentence and told it to her. Nonetheless, he said she could appeal her sentence and request the Bombay Criminal Court to reduce it. According to the Indian law, a suspect who willingly participated on drugs activities might get up to 19 years prison term under hard labor. Even so, if the criminal court accepted the appeal, the sentence might be chopped down to a half. In any case, the suspect Inaz Ahmed Salah was going to spend not less than 9 years in prison. Inaz knew she could absolve herself from any culpability if she revealed the true identities of the Indian couple who assisted her to escape from the hotel in Qatar and return to India. Nonetheless, she would rather choose to spend all the rest of her life in jail than exposing those who saved her life from those Muslim terrorists who wanted to kill her for exposing their terror-inspired religion. On the final hearing day, Inaz was escorted inside the spacious hall of the Bombay Criminal Court by 3 elephantine policewomen. Among the 3 huge policewomen was the man in woman's body who cruelly tortured her. The defendant Inaz was made to stand in a small holding cell. Her lawyer was standing with the prosecutor on the side closest to the jury box. The judge was sitting in a bench on a raised wooden desk at the front of the courtroom. On the final hearing day, among the attendants, were Mr. Joseph Abraha, Mr. Vijay Alexander, Mrs. Mary Alexander, and Miss Teresa Alexander. All 4 were sitting together in the front bench. Also, there were over 200 Muslim Sudanese students. Among them were the 2 bad omen birds, the crow and the owl, Mr. Khalid Mamoun Alajabu and Miss Mary Akal. Surprisingly, Mr. Tariq Harun Alajabu and his Egyptian ugly beauty and their little daughter were also presented themselves. Inaz was astonished when she saw the most ugly Arab girl she ever had seen was sitting very close to her ex-boyfriend. Mr. Tariq put his right hand around the waist of his Arab wife and drew her closer to his mouth and printed a kiss on her fleshless cheek. His action made Inaz to shudder and feel disgusted, and therefore she turned her face away from them. The Muslim Sudanese students were following the developments of Inaz's legal case from the day she got arrested at the Bombay Chhatrapati International Airport until the day she was brought for her final hearing. They all came over there to witness the condemnation of the most hated Sudanese girl in the entire universe. When they read in the newspapers that the infamous Inaz was arrested under the charges of drug smuggling and adultery, they hated her the more. Some of them fasted and prayed to their God Allah and petitioned him to grant them victory by sentencing the apostate Sudanese girl to life imprisonment. They had already read in the newspapers that the Sudanese suspect Inaz Ahmed Salah was going to be handed down 19-year sentence. The final hearing commenced by the courtroom clerk reading the rap sheet that had been prepared jointly by the Bombay Police of the CID and Narcotics Departments. The judge and his jury had already heard the charges and prepared their final verdict. Then the judge asked the lawyer and the prosecutor if they had anything to say. Both of them said they had nothing new to add. Out of formality, the judge directed the same question to the defendant Inaz. She also said she had nothing to say and then bowed her head and began to weep. All this time, Inaz avoided to have an eye contact with her husband Joseph and the Alexander family. Her pain and mental tortures were beyond descriptions. No human language could describe the pain she felt in her heart when she saw her husband sitting near their baby daughter Grace and carrying on his hands her baby boy Victor. She knew she might not see them again. Inaz expected that she wouldn't remain alive for long inside the Indian jails. She knew sooner or later she would be murdered by an Indian inmate who hates foreigners. Notwithstanding, just before the judge would deliver his final verdict, the silence was broke by a loud voice of a young girl shouting, "Objection, Your Honor, the judge." She didn't wait for the judge to give her permission to speak. I am Miss Teresa Alexander, who travelled from Bombay to Doha and met Inaz in the hotel and gave her my passport and helped her to escape from those fanatic Muslims who gathered around the hotel to kill her. Here are the 2 passports, which I had used to smuggle Inaz back to India, although her name was blacklisted. After speaking out boldly and truthfully her heart and mind, Teresa stepped forward and handed the 2 passports to Inaz's lawyer. Her action and confession had altered the entire course of the final trial. The lawyer examined the 2 passports and then passed them to the prosecutor. The prosecutor also looked at the 2 passports which had the same name of Teresa Alexander, but one had Inaz's photo and the other Teresa's photo. The 2 passports finally rested in the hand of the judge. The magistrate judge took long time carefully examining every page of the 2 Indian travelling documents. Before he could utter a word, the silence was broken again by a loud voice of a man who stood beside Teresa Alexander and began to speak out his mind. I am Mr. Vijay Alexander, the brother of Teresa Alexander. Whatever the charge sheet has mentioned about my sister and I are mere lies created by the Bombay Narcotics Police. My sister and I have never been involved in any drugs activities either in India or the Middle East. I myself have never visited the state of Qatar in all my life. Therefore, the false charge which stated that Inaz and I had sex in the hotel at Doha City is false and malicious accusation. Finally, I confess in this Indian court of law that it was me who created the 2nd passport which has my sister's name and Inaz's photo and also sent my sister Teresa Alexander to Doha City. I had also provided the air tickets for my sister's round trip and Inaz's return ticket. I am ready to stand trial and be prosecuted for breaking the Indian law for creating a forged passport and using it to rescue Inaz Ahmed Salah from those Arab Muslims who surrounded her hotel and threatened her life and demanded her death. When Mr. Vijay Alexander finished his long confession, the courtroom became so quiet one could hear a pin drop. This time, the deafening silence was broke by the defendant, who understood that she had been vindicated from all the false allegations of sex and drugs activity. Therefore, Inaz lifted up her head and raised her voice and started to speak. I have remained silent all this time and decided never to expose the people who rescued my life from those fanatic Muslims who gathered around the hotel and wanted to kill me. To protect and honor such honorable souls, I had allowed that evil head of the CID to blackmail me and rape me. I had also allowed this wicked policewoman who is standing here in this court of law to torture me through the most painful and cruel harsh interrogation method that a human being could ever devise. She is the one who shot the video while her wicked boss was raping me inside the interrogation room. Then the 2 of them had fabricated some photos of a Muslim woman dressed up in black burqa and falsely claimed it was me engaged in drugs trafficking in Bombay. She is lying, shouted the man in woman's body. Arrest her, the judge shouted, while he was pointing his finger towards the Hindu mistress of Ralph Wolf. 3 police officers responded to his order and rushed towards the corrupt female guard and caught hold of her hands and tied them together with a big and long rope. After that, they removed her revolver which was fastened around her huge backside. While they were taking her out of the courtroom, her mouth was spewing out all the filthy Hindi words that one could ever utter. Court is adjourned until further notice, the judge spoke in anger. Chapter 99. The Departure. A couple of hours passed since the Air Canada plane took off from the London Heathrow International Airport and headed towards the New World. It was 33,000 feet above the sea level and below was the raging waves of the Atlantic Ocean. Many hours had passed since the Abraha family's plane left the dark third world behind and headed towards the light of reason and freedom. At last, the heavily persecuted and terribly abused Sudanese apostate girl Inaz was set free from the dark dungeon and allowed to fly away, leaving behind her the Muslim world with all its abuses and exploitations. No girl had ever been subjected to such injustice and persecutions as she had gone through. Among her Sudanese people she became the most hated girl. In her church, she was despised and called a backslidden Christian. Her father had made 3 attempts to slay her in honor killing, but he failed. Her Sudanese embassy plotted 3 times to kidnap and deport her to Sudan, but their evil schemes were frustrated thrice. Her Indian interrogators had subjected her to the most brutal tortures a suspect had ever gone through. One of them raped her and used his evil deed to condemn and destroy her life. She lived for 1 year inside the filthiest, noxious, and dangerous prison in the entire world. Her first husband, Osama Hashim Salah, sold her as a sex slave through gambling to 7 Arab men who raped her inside her bedroom. Her former lover and pseudo-husband Tariq Harun al-Ajabo plotted against her with her tyrant father and with another corrupt Muslim imam, and tried to destroy her marriage life and punish her as an apostate for her conversion from Islam to Christianity. He even used her church pastor in his evil scheme, and through him he nullified her Christian marriage contract. Those were just a few drops of raging ocean of suffering and abuses. In all those dark days and nights, Inaz found one single man who stood by her side and fought with her all her battles until they finally achieved victory and flew from the dark world. Inaz also found a true Christian family who adopted her as their own daughter and did everything they could to protect her from her persecutors and abusers. They risked their lives to save her life. They went twice against the decisions of their church and helped her when everyone forsook and despised her. They broke the Indian law and rescued her from the deadly jaws of Islam. They were tried, convicted, and made to pay a huge amount of money as fines. Luckily, neither Mr. Vijay Alexander nor his sister Teresa Alexander had gone to jail. Inaz wept like a baby who was separated from her mother when she kissed goodbye her best friend Teresa Alexander and her brother in Christ Vijay Alexander and her sister in the Christian faith Mary Alexander at the Bombay Chhatrapati International Airport. If she could, she would have brought them with her and live with them in the same residence in Canada. They weren't humans, but angels sent down from heaven by the Lord to live among evil and sinful earthlings to teach them by their good examples all the moral virtues and divine love. The agape love, which the unconditional love of God that loves the unlovable. When she was forsaken twice by her church leadership and congregation, they stood with her and treated her as sister in the faith and their own adopted daughter. When she had no lawyer to defend her in court, they appointed an attorney for her. And when her lawyer could not refute the serious charges of drugs and adultery written against her, they came for her rescue again and took the blame on them. Through their bold confessions, Inaz was acquitted with honor and received a huge compensation from the government of Maharashtra. They paid her 7 crores of Indian rupees. 70 million Indian rupees equals $98,133. After her honorable release, her friend Teresa flew with her to New Delhi. Joseph stayed behind to take care of their 2 babies, Grace and Victor. The UN office had already received 2 official letters from the Bombay Criminal Court and her attorney lawyer. The letters stated that the suspect Inaz Ahmed Salah had been cleared from the charges of drug smuggling, and those who fabricated the malicious accusations were thrown behind bars awaiting their punishments. Copies of those official letters were forwarded by her UN legal representative to the Sudanese embassy and the Canadian embassy before Inaz arrived at the United Nations office. Therefore, she was told to go and renew her family emergency traveling documents at the Red Cross office, the landing immigrant visas, and receive 4 new air tickets from the Canadian embassy. Inaz added her baby boy Victor to her file. The 2 friends spent 10 days in a beautiful hotel before they flew back to Bombay. During those days, the 2 intimate friends went on sightseeing around New Delhi and also travelled to Agra city and visited the crown of the palaces, Taj Mahal. For the first time in her life, Teresa Alexander got a chance to visit the historical tomb of Mumtaz Mahal, the favourite wife of the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan. The Alexander family threw one of the biggest parties in the city of Bombay as a farewell party for the 4 Abrahas. It was a time of celebration and mourning for the Abraha family as well as for the Alexander family. The happiest day for both families was the day in which Inaz was declared not guilty by the Bombay Criminal Court and acquitted with her head lifted up high. That day none of those 200 Sudanese Muslim terrorist students who masqueraded themselves as seekers of knowledge had showed up. Even her ex-boyfriend Tariq and his Egyptian queen of ugly beauty didn't come to witness her honorable release. It was the despicable Khalid who phoned his cousin Tariq and informed him about the adultery and drugs charges of the Arab girl whom he used to worship. Tariq came all the way from Cairo to Bombay with his ugly Arab wife to witness the humiliation and condemnation of the girl who was supposedly ditched him and sold her religion for the sake of the extremely handsome Ethiopian boy. His love was fleeting love. He used to love her body, color, and straight and long hair. He didn't love her soul and noble character. When he didn't get her, he tried to destroy her. His love turned into reckless hatred as soon as he came to know she fell in love with someone else. That someone fell in love with her when everybody around her hated her and persecuted her. It was Joseph who went deep down into her inner being and discovered a noble soul and fell in love with that gracious and pure angelic soul. No matter what she did or what the world around her had said about her, his love for her never wavered or changed. It remained solid as iron and steadfastly continued to grow day after day. It was firm in purpose, resolution, faith, and attachment. It was also unwavering in commitment, loyalty, and adherence. It was like the attachment of a devotee to his deity and goddess of love and beauty. Joseph's love for Inez surpassed the love of Romeo to Juliet and Caius to Lila. Even it was stronger than the love of the Europeans to soccer. Soccer has replaced the place of God in Europe. Therefore, the majority of Europeans worship their new god. People go crazy after soccer. It isn't a soccer they worship, but something else. They worship the demons behind those soccer matches. Many times, I saw thousands of fans carrying banners in which written in capital letters, "Soccer is our religion." The soccer players have become idols and therefore have thousands of their worshippers. There is nothing wrong of being a soccer fan and watching a soccer match. But, if the game replaces the place of God in someone's heart, then soccer becomes an idol, and as the Bible says, behind every idol there is a demon worshipped. And through that demon, Satan is worshipped by proxy. People all over the world worship false gods and some even worship Satan. But there is only one true God, and he has never taken idolatry lightly. So, my humble advice to those who love soccer more than they love God, is to repent and rebuke the devil. They shouldn't give Satan again a place in their hearts and never allow him to be worshipped by proxy through those soccer games and players. The same thing could be said about American popular singers. Likewise, many youth love those singers more than they love their creator. An American music and singer like a soccer game and player are worshipped by millions of people. Once again, it is Satan whom they worship by proxy. Air Canada plane was now more closer to the new world than the dark world from which Inez had come with her loving husband and their adorable children Grace and Victor. Just like the plane was suspended between heaven and earth. Everywhere the person would look, he would see the pure sky engulfing the majestic aircraft. In that divine presence, the plane continued to swim forward as an airship floating in the air. Inez wished she would never see again those children of darkness who turned her life into a living hell. From her childhood they used her and abused her. As a female, their religious system made her to be vulnerable to all kinds of abuse, oppression, persecution, exploitation, and mistreatment. It allowed them to abuse her through female genital mutilation, child marriage, wife beating, polygamy, right-hand possession, hijab, niqab or burqa covering, etc., etc., etc. How could they not abuse her when their prophet abused a 9-year-old female child as Aisha, raped a defenseless captive girl as Safiya, murdered women who criticized his brutality as Asma bint Marwan and Gurfa, committed adultery with his helpless maidservant Maria, deprived his adopted son of his only wife and slept with her while he had many wives and female slaves, and the list go on. How could such a man be the prophet of God who allowed his followers to invade, steal, rob, rape, enslave, dispossess people of other faiths of their lands, and destroy their places of worship, etc.? How could they be the holy warriors of God when they forced people of different religions to accept their satanic religion by the sword, killed their men, robbed their homes and properties, raped their women, enslaved their children, and sold their children and women in the slaves' markets? Inez and her family were the first passengers to pass through the customs at Toronto International Airport. As soon as they emerged out of the Boeing 747 jumbo jet airliner and entered the arrival hall, the first thing drew Inaz's attention were the people around her. They were so healthy and well dressed up. They were beautiful and handsome people. They looked very rich. Their children were happy and playful. They attracted everyone looked at them. Inaz wished that she could touch, carry, kiss, or hug one of them. Whenever she looked at one, she or he smiled to her. Her mind was forced to recollect the images of those emaciated children she saw in the streets of Bombay and back home. The pictures of those emaciated and dying children she left behind in the dark world caused hot tears to fall from her eyes. She took her handkerchief and wiped away the tears that began to blind her vision. She came out of the arrival hall into the waiting hall followed by her husband Joseph and their daughter Grace. She was carrying her sleeping son on her shoulder. Inaz was amazed by the marvelous beauty and cleanness of the Toronto International Airport. Everybody was happy and beautiful and everything was clean and shining as if it was brand new. Inaz thought that they had landed in paradise and those people weren't humans, but angels. She made a quick contrast between her people back home and those Canadian people. Everyone in her country was either evil man or victim woman. Most of her people were always angry, hungry, and suffering. Her entire homeland was so dirty and filthy as if the whole country of Sudan was a huge garbage container. Inaz, Joseph, and their children like the Puritans who escaped religious persecution in the Third World and sought freedom in the New World. Alas, if Inaz knew that, her 3 speeches which she delivered in that private meeting of the Sudanese secular students would be counted as hate crime in her new sanctuary, she would never have immigrated to the Western world. And if she anticipated that, her life would be exposed to more danger in Canada than in India, she would have continued to live with those loving and caring Alexanders. What Inaz and her husband did not know was that Muslim terrorists, in like manner of the mafia, were single-mindedly tenacious in tracking down whistleblowers. There was no place on earth that would grant them respite. With their omnipresence in Western cities, large and small, the only sure sanctuary was the grave. Only God could protect you from them. They were rapidly growing and multiplying in the West through polygamy, unrestrained birth rates and conversions from within and without, through mass immigrations, illegal aliens, refugees resettlements, and illegal entry from all points to the Western world. Every Muslim wanted to escape from his country because his country was hell on earth. The paradox was that every Muslim hated the Western way of life, but loved Western lands. They wanted to come to the West because of the benefits made available to them there. Their women loved to live in the West because they will be protected from the oppression and abuses of their male-dominated societies. Even so, none of them could accept the Western culture. When they come to the West they see themselves as the most moral and holy people with everybody else being immoral and unclean infidel. They call themselves, the halal people, and view the infidels as haram people. They want to eat halal food, have halal sex marriage, make halal friends, put on halal clothes, send their children to halal madrasas or schools, go to halal female doctors, create no-go zone areas which off limits to non-Muslims, and live in halal cordoned-off habitats, etc. And they look to all non-Muslim as unclean and defiled infidels. The only thing they don't mind to have is the haram money of the infidels. Many Muslim imams and scholars issued fatwas forbidding Muslims living in the West to accept welfare money and other financial aids and assistance from the infidels. They believe, the infidels' money is haram money because it includes taxes collected from liquor stores, disco bars, casinos, strippers, dancers, half-naked popular American singers, lotteries, swimming pools, infidels' salaries and wages, etc. Nonetheless, not a single Muslim family or an individual Muslim follow those fatwas. Everything from the infidels is haram except their money. Sometimes, their hatred of Western way of life might drive them back to the Muslim lands and join the Muslim terrorist groups. Muslim immigrants never speak the truth about their countries. Most of them will tell you that they fled from their countries because their lives were in danger due to their indifferences with the present regimes. This begs the question as to why they did not stay and change the things. They would tell you that it was not possible because the regime was an absolute dictatorship. If you cannot stomach the idea of a dictatorship, then why do you yearn for the implementation of Sharia and Caliphate government, since they are even more dictatorial? ISIS is the true expression of the Islamic Caliphate rule. What the Prophet Muhammad and his companions did to the pagans of Arabia and the infidels of the world is the same thing the Mujahideen of ISIS or the Islamic Caliphate had done to the Iraqi Yazidi women and children. They killed the Yazidi men who refused to accept Islam, raped their women, enslaved their children, and sold their girls and children in the slaves' markets. The alleged Prophet of God and his Mujahideen killed the pagans and infidels, robbed their properties and cattle, raped their women, enslaved their children, and sold their girls and children in the slaves' markets. Why Muslims don't ask themselves the question, why what ISIS Mujahideen had done is wrong, while what Prophet Muhammad and his companions had done is right? Why the same evil is halal for the alleged Prophet of God and his Mujahideen and haram for the Mujahideen of the Islamic Caliphate of ISIS?